he's Israel's favorite son, which is
Yeah.
totally cool. I have a favorite of my own sons, and he's going to get all of the blessings, and everybody else is getting curses.
But it's okay for you to have that opinion because your son is your firstborn, right?
Not this one.
Okay. Moving on. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eating the Apple. I'm Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And today we're going to continue discussing Genesis chapter. We're going to be starting with chapter 37. Hopefully getting through the life of Joseph.
Hopefully. It's going to be packed, I think.
He's his story it's almost fitting that this is the culmination of Genesis because it's all of the things we've been discussing just kind of like slammed together, packed into one. He has all of the character traits and, prophecy and all these other things, all the, promises are being fulfilled here.
Yeah, I think the NIV Study Bible actually puts it really well. Let me see if I can read directly from the note. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Remember, silence is fine.
Right. Yeah, it says, in his generation, he, more than any other, represented Israel as a people who struggled with both God and human beings and overcame.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. I don't know about the struggle with God, because they're referencing directly, Jacob, Israel's, wrestling match. But, that's pretty succinct. I like it.
Yeah, I agree. So who was Joseph? Why is he someone who's worthy of this quarter of Genesis? His whole story is a quarter of Genesis.
He's Israel's favorite son, which is totally cool. I have a favorite of my own sons, and he's going to get all of the blessings, and everybody else is getting curses.
But it's okay for you to have that opinion because your son is your firstborn, right?
Not this one.
Okay. Moving on. I'll let you and your God determine whether or not that's okay. Okay. So Joseph is his father's favorite, and Jacob bestows upon Joseph a special gift, a special coat, right? And it's an ornate robe. Is this the coat of many colors that is so storied?
Yeah, the Technicolor Dream coat. Yeah, that's it.
All those things. Wow. Okay, that's neat. So he gives him this coat, and the brothers, his other brothers, his 10 older brothers, are kind of indignant. They're like, this isn't fair. What the heck is this crap? Here we are, working and being born before you and all this other stuff. And just because your mother was the one that our father loved the best, you get a fancy coat?
Well,
Go
ahead. I was going to say here at the beginning, it goes even further, and Joseph has a dream where essentially the theme is that his brothers are going to bow down and worship him, and that upsets them, obviously. And my note is just a little what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bit snarky, but Joseph was a snitch. I hope this doesn't pretend something awful.
It's so interesting because yes, Joseph. Okay, so all the brothers are out in the field working the grain, doing like binding their sheaves and all these other things, doing the work of what you do back in those days, 2000 BC. And they're doing that field work. And Joseph is a little, 17-year-old snot-nosed daddy's boy.
Yeah.
Who he basically stands over there and just reports back on all the things that his brothers do. Right. He's like a little, he's a snitch, you know? And so not only is there that to dislike about him, but also he's been given this ornate robe. And one thing that I've read that I'm not sure if it gets into in the Bible, but I've read in other sources, is that the robe is indicative of something different. It's to signify not only that he is favored because of its ornate qualities, but also because it's a long sleeved garment, it's meant to show I don't work. I don't need the freedom of arm movement. I don't, this thing will stay nice because my hands will not be doing any labor.
Yeah,
so he's out there.
That's definitely not in the Bible, but I could see that being the case.
Yeah. And so he's out there standing over them. Like he probably has his whatever his sheaving tools, his implements of the field, but he's not using them. They're clean. They're still shiny. And they're out there just hacking away at the ground, being like, this son of a gun. Like, who in the heck does he think he is? And so he comes to them and he tells them about his dream. Did you already get into the dream?
I summarized it. His dream is that he's out in the field and he's hacking down his sheaves, and then his sheaves that stood upright, and all the other sheaves his brother were bringing in bowed down to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he said
the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down as well. Oh, that's another dream.
Yeah, that's the one he shows. That's the one he tells to his father, right? So, okay, he tells them this dream, and they're indignant. They're saying, "What do you expect us to bow down to you?" He's like, "Get out of here, you dreamer." By the way, do you remember what Joseph means? Like, why was he named Joseph? So, Joseph simply apparently means, and this is according to many traditions, because it's also written in the Quran. Yosef, his name is, or Yusuf, is to gather, remove, and take away. That's what Joseph. Mm-hmm. That's what Joseph's name. That's the etymology of Joseph's name. So I guess there's something there.
Maybe.
So that's why there's well, the reason why I mentioned that is because Joseph will be given another name later, and it's an interesting name. It's interesting how so far all these folks have been named. Like Jacob is the deceiver, but it can also mean heel grabber. Esau, he's hairy, so his name is Harry. Esau means hairy. Mm-hmm. Things like this. You would expect for Joseph's name to be a little bit more on the nose, but it simply means to gather, remove, take away. Maybe we'll see as the story progresses whether or not that sort of like, nomenclature holds true. But he does get a little bit more of an appropriate name narratively later in the story.
What's kind of backwards, don't you think? You got 10 kids. The later the kid, the more descriptive the name. This kid's Harry, we'll call him Harry. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
At first, you've got the good names picked out.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, but also because of how Jacob's kids were all kind of, it's not as if he was doing the thing that he wanted to have done.
Right,
like he,
right.
Dan, Asher, Naphtali, all these guys, they're given names that like signify how God is bestowing blessings on the handmaid and things like that. For Jacob, it's like not until Joseph is born that he's like, there we go. There's the son I've been waiting for. There's the son that God promised Abraham. Okay, so he's told his brothers that basically he's having dreams that more or less signify, hey, I'm going to rule over you. Okay, they're not saying that in all those words, but that's what all the brothers, they're like looking sideways at him, like, okay. So anyway, they go to graze their flocks near Shechem. And if we can recall a couple of episodes ago, Shechem is the site of a massive slaughter that Simeon and Levi did, right? Like that's where they killed everybody except for the village leader and the son. And they're like, yeah, go graze your flocks over there. Like, what must those townsfolk have thought? They're like, oh my, they're coming back. Here they come. Yeah.
Maybe the Lord still had his fear over them. I don't know.
That could be. So he says, Jacob says to Joseph, go, your brothers are grazing their flocks over there. Go and see your brothers and report back to me. He says that to them. He's like,
that supports your the thing you brought up too about him not having a job, just being the snitch.
Yeah.
He's being sent to snitch, and he's not out there with them to begin with.
And if you're working the fields, you're probably wearing clothing that's, that is lightweight, breathes well, but covers you from the sun. Here comes Joseph in this like ornate robe. Like you can see him coming from a ways away. And they're just like, here comes this guy. Oh, in fact, they say, here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into a cistern and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams, right? Reuben, the firstborn, he tries to stop them. He's like, don't kill him, but let's not and say we did. Let's throw him in the well, take his clothes, and make it look like he was devoured by a ferocious animal, right? And it says that whenever they do so, they hatch this scheme. Reuben stays their hand when it comes to killing them. They continue on, and Judah says to him, well, why would we even do that? Like, why would we kill him, and why would we want to like leave him for dead? Let's sell him to this band of Ishmaelites that are coming down the road. Right.
So I wanted to bring up, you talked about listening to that Bema podcast, and I've started listening to it too. I like it. If anybody out there wants to listen, I think it's worth a listen. But they mentioned that there's a slight discrepancy, I guess, in the original text versus what's translated, and it makes it sound like the Ishmaelites, like the brothers, don't sell him to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites are the ones that come across him and find him and take him and sell him into slavery.
Interesting.
But that's directly contradicted by what's in the text, because it says, after Judah says, well, what if we kill him? What do we gain? It says, come on, let's sell him. And then the Midianite merchants came by, and it says his brothers pulled him up. And this is the part they talked about in the Bama podcast. They say it doesn't say his brothers, it just says they. So it sounds like the Midianites are the ones that pulled him up out of the cistern. Where did I just read this. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so here's what it says his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern. I was looking elsewhere, but it's the same verse. It says, and sold him for 20 shekels to the Ishmaelites. So the Ishmaelites couldn't have been the ones that, pulled him up and sold him. They obviously did that too, because Egypt's the one that ended up with him. But, you're not going to sell him to yourself. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've read conflicting stories about what Ishmaelites, what that really meant. I read an account yesterday that was the Ishmaelites were the traders. There was a caravan of generic Ishmaelites that came through. And then a different group of Midianites, like specifically, who are Ishmaelites, mm-hmm. came through. What happened? Because of the presence of the Midianites, the Ishmaelites decided, okay, we will buy him. We're going to sell him straight to the Midianites because we're traders. We don't need a slave, mm-hmm. but we recognize his value as a slave. So pull him out. Here's your shekels. Sell him to the Midianites. The Midianites take him into Egypt and sell him to the whomever, or the government or whatever, to Potiphar. Mm-hmm. I read that and found that interesting because, and also whenever you mentioned the term they, it was Marty on the Bama podcast that first helped me recognize that whenever they say the word they, mm-hmm. sometimes they're speaking for a unit of people acting as one. So like they'll mm-hmm. say, yeah. So anyway, I found that interesting. But yeah, that's a very good point. Okay. So let's see. So again, Reuben has gone. He comes back and finds that his brother's gone. He's like, I thought I told you guys we're not killing him. This isn't what we're doing. So he was frustrated by it. And he said, so they went ahead with the plan as it was. They got his robe, dipped it, or slaughtered a goat, dipped the blood, dipped the robe into the blood, and took it back to Jacob and said, oh, golly, this is your dad. Or take a look at this robe. Does this robe look familiar? We don't know. And he was like, yeah, that's my son's robe.
Yeah,
it's covered in blood.
You can't exactly read this into it, but I imagine, it's the equivalent of like having the monogram on your jacket now. I don't think there's a way they would have not known if they had just come across it in the field, unless mm-hmm. it was just completely torn to shreds and not dipped in blood.
Right. Yeah, and some of the things I've read, they discuss how the ruse is very light. There's not much to it. It's like Jacob, some of the things I read said that Jacob, you would think that by Genesis 37:34 here, that he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and mourns for many days. He's like, this is my son's robe. A ferocious animal has devoured him. Surely he's been torn to pieces. That sounds like a father in agony, a parent who's lamenting the death of their child. But because of the prophecy, because of the things he's been told, he's going through the motions of mourning, but he recognizes that what he's mourning is the loss of his son, not the death of his son. There's nothing to confirm that the son is dead except for this piece of bloody cloth. I found that interesting. But
so it says, Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned his son many days. I know the law hasn't been established yet, supposedly, but they had their customs, and that sounds like a very Jewish custom. So I don't know enough about it to know if he was mourning his son or mourning the loss of his son, like you said. It sounds like it's a standard funerary kind of mourning, except for the part where he says he refused to be comforted. I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we're supposed to take that literally or if that's just something that he said, mm-hmm. because he was in grief. But, it definitely seems to me like he's mourning him like funerary style.
And that's I'm glad you brought that specific phrase, because Rashi has a note about that. He says that he refuses to be comforted because there's nothing for which he needs to be comforted. It'd be like me profusely apologizing for something to which you take no offense. Like, you don't have to apologize. Like, it's fine. I won't be comforted because I don't know if my son's dead. That's kind of how they drew that. That's kind of how he comes to that conclusion, I think. And yeah, and as such, I find that pretty interesting. You know, this isn't the last time we're going to see Jacob, even though the story is going to continue. We'll kind of see later how there's a through line that connects Jacob's period of mourning back to, you know, what Joseph's eventual fate is.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, that's the end of chapter 37. He gets sold to the Midian, or to the Ishmaelites, and he gets taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, a kind of a low level functionary of the Egyptian government.
Yeah, I wanted to point out though, because you did mention that the Midianites and the Ishmaelites may not have necessarily been the same group of people. Because the Midianites were merchants, and in verse 28 it says the Midianites sold him to the Ishmaelites, or his brother sold him, you know, either way. But it's kind of ambiguous as to if the Midianites are the same Ishmaelites are talking about. But then in verse 36 at the very end, it says the Midianites sold Joseph. So it does seem to me to be very clear that it's his brothers who sold him to these people, who then sold him to Egypt, and not some kind of weird third party intermediate coming through.
Yeah.
So yeah,
by a plain reading of the text, I would agree. It's kind of confusing. Like, and that's why I like the Rashi interpretation, because it's like, well, what do we make of this? Is everything okay? Okay. Like, what are we to make of this? If you and I are just coming to this from a normal perspective, like no one's seeking out the Rashi interpretation from the Middle Ages in France.
Yeah, but I mean, that also, a lot of that stuff, you know, it just smacks of me of reading too much into it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm undertaking this as a plain reading of the Bible, and I am doing research because it interests me, and I'm following that, you know, wherever it goes, and I'm reading extra biblical sources and all that. But that's informing my plain reading, and not, you know, the other way around, kind of. And that just seems like it's a bit too far. It might not be. You know, you can gain wisdom like that. Like, I'm not trying to, you know, say to anybody that believes this that you're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you believe it literally is true, then you are wrong. But, you know, if it gives you some kind of hope, or if it makes you feel better or improves your life, then have at it. You know, I hope this will further that for you. But I just have to take it as a plain reading, and that just seems too far to me.
I completely understand and agree. Okay, so we're 22 minutes into this recording, and we're through the first chapter. I'm really excited to see what happens to Joseph. So let's get to chapter 38 so we can continue Joseph's story.
I'll try to hurry.
Okay, chapter 38. What happens to Joseph in chapter 38? What? He just got sold into Egypt. What are you talking about? He's a slave. How can nothing happen? Well, it's because we don't care what happens to Joseph immediately. He's been sold into slavery. Let's check in on Judah. Well, what happened to Judah?
It takes time to get down to Egypt.
I did write that it's, according to a source that I looked up, it's 600 miles. It's from Canaan to Egypt to where he ends up in Egypt. It's 600 miles.
And I'm assuming he's being, you know, like led behind a cart or something like that. That's a slow trip.
Yeah, and he doesn't have his long sleeved robe to protect him anymore. Okay, so we're gonna check in on Judah. So the last time we saw Judah was he basically concocted and blessed a plan to rid the brothers of Joseph, right? So we're gonna catch up on his story and kind of see what happens whenever he's demoted in the eyes of his brothers. That's some of the interpretations I read, is that the reason why we're doing this now, when we could have done it any time, is because we need to put this in here now so we know what's up with Judah, and because it's not really going to fit in anywhere else. We had to put it in here. Where we're going to do it. Exodus, get out of here. Okay, so Judah marries a Canaanite woman, Tamar, which is great. Those are the people that we want. We want the Canaanites. And his sons die. Do we have an account of why his sons don't make it?
No, it just says that or however you pronounce his name, was Judah's firstborn. He was wicked in the Lord's sight, so God killed him. I don't know, like after the flood, we learn that the heart of man is still all evil all the time. So I don't know how much more wicked you can be.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no explanation other than he was wicked.
I have a fun little explanation. I have a fun little interpretation that I read. So dies because he's wicked, and then so because of the way things work, his younger son Onan had to take over, had to marry, or had to. Did we get the lady's wife?
The lady's wife?
I'm sorry. Oh, I think I might have misspoke. So Judah married Hira, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so Tamar is the daughter. I might
Right.
have misspoken. Okay, so was put to death by the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
No explanation of how. Probably snakes. And then so Onan had to step in and fulfill his brother's job as the firstborn and like conceive a son, right?
Mm.
But it didn't work out because because of how beautiful Tamar was, and because he knew it wasn't going to be his son, he did a little coitus interruptus.
Because she's beautiful?
Thank you for asking that. It's not going to say that in the text. That is so interesting. It says Rashi tells us this.
Mm-hmm.
Rashi says because she's so beautiful, he doesn't want to spoil her figure. So anyway, that's what there.
It's not what's in the text.
Exactly. And so then we go through. So it says in the text that God doesn't like that. That's what happens, that he pulls out and puts him to death also. And because of that word also, it can be assumed that that's why was put to death as well.
Could be, maybe. I mean, it's reading too much into it, but I could see it as a possibility. You
don't hate that?
He didn't want to get his wife pregnant yet.
Yeah. That's like, I don't have any money. Like we've been cast away. We're outside of Jacob's fortune right now. So anyway, probably not. I mean, I would assume that Judah's still, considered he's still a son of Jacob's, but he has been sort of like, the text isn't going to say it, but I mean, that's the intention of this being here in the middle of Joseph's story, is that Judah's been kind of like, why don't you go away for a while? But again, that's reading too much into it. It's not going to say that.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, they go in because now there's no sons, right?
No sons
Tamar,
that are old enough.
Right. That's right. There's one more. What's his name? Timnah? No.
It's
Shua.
No.
I should stop saying names. Shelah. So after
Tamar's
Tamar's first two husbands, Judah's first two sons have been smote by the Lord. He's like, hey Tamar, why don't you just kind of chill over here until Shelah's old enough to be like to procreate or whatever, because otherwise the God keeps killing my kids. So something weird, right? And then Tamar concocts a plan, right?
Years later.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that happens in the interregnum?
What do you mean?
So there's that. So that happens. Tamar's first two husbands die, and then Judah's like, all right, well, you're not going to don't get married until my youngest son is an adult.
Oh, that's what you were getting at. I thought you were trying to point at something else. I was like,
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I'm trying to remember I don't remember the exact direction the story goes, but essentially Tamar concocts this plan to veil her face and to hide as a prostitute, or to like pretend that she's a prostitute in order to like catch Judah in like a marriage trap or a child trap, right?
More deception.
Yeah, there you go.
She took off her widow's clothes and covered herself with a veil.
Mm-hmm. On the crossroads to the town where Judah's friend was, right? So she ends up sleeping with Judah. Judah, by the way, knew what he was getting into, insofar as she
was a prostitute. Yeah,
thought she was a prostitute, and that's fine. And
they negotiate for a goat.
That's right. Yeah, that's the price. That's the price of sleeping with a prostitute, is a goat. But that wasn't enough for Tamar. She wanted something else.
She just said, well, she's very clever about it, because she's like, well, hang on, you're not giving me a goat right now. How about you give me your seal, your signet ring, whatever you want. I mean, it's it's specific in the text, but that's the idea. This is proof this is you. I can prove this is you. So in order to get this back, you have to pay me. It's collateral, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But she's very crafty about it because this identifies him.
Exactly. So smart. I love it. She's great. Yeah, you're right. So anyway, she conceives by Judah. This one session, perfect timing. She conceives, has the baby, and Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, his pledge being the signet ring and his staff. But he didn't find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where's the shrine prostitute who is beside the road in Naim?" "There's no prostitute here," they said. They went back to Judah and said, "We didn't find her." And they said that there's no prostitute there. Said, "Well, you know what?" He said, Let her keep my stuff, or else we'll become a laughing stock." I tried to figure that out. And basically what I found was that they're like, look, if we keep going around asking who has my stuff because they're a prostitute and I owe them a wage, like just whatever, I can find another ring and staff. Not a big deal. Yeah. And so 3 months later, they find that Tamar's pregnant. She's showing, I suppose. And they take that to Judah. That's such a scandal. Judah,
it says that she's guilty of prostitution, which technically she was, but who would have known that? Like, did they just assume because she's unwed and she's pregnant that she's a prostitute?
Good point. I wonder what the distinction is.
How they found out, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I didn't even think of. To me, I was reading the text and it just says Tamar is guilty of prostitution. I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, but no, you're absolutely right. So what's the penalty of prostitution according to Judah here?
I'm sorry.
Burn her.
Oh yeah, burn her alive. Burn her.
Bring her out and burn her to death. Yeah, exactly. So he has no compunction when it comes to like hiring a prostitute, using them for their services or whatever. But he will be damned if his daughter-in-law is going to be guilty of the same thing, even though she's twice a widow. He's going to store her in his house until his youngest, and saving her for the third arranged marriage.
Well, but it's property, you know.
Yeah.
It's like if, let's say, you've got a car and it's going to pass down to your kid or whatever, and you let someone borrow it and they wreck it, you know. That's how he's looking at it. It's ruined goods.
But then you don't burn the car. You might find the person that ruined it, which is
same thing. It's, you know.
No, what I'm saying is you're right. And so what they end up doing here in the text is they find the person, they don't blame the car. The car speaks for itself and says, "Hey, Judah, you were the one driving." So they have her brought out and burnt to be burned to death, and she brings out the staff and the signet ring, says, "I'm pregnant by the person who gave me these." And Judah's like, "Oh boy." They're like, "Yep, she's more righteous than I." It says that he did not sleep with her again.
Just real quick, in between that, it says she's more righteous than I, since I would not give her to my son. But that was the plan. Like, unless he was being deceitful to begin with and was just like, you know what, just go back to your father. I'll come and get you, you know, and then with no intention of doing that.
Yeah. Part of what I read was that there were times in which he could have, in this time, that he could have given Shelah to her, or however it works, she to Shelah, but he was wary of God smiting him as well, smiting Shelah. So he like withheld her until such time that he deemed it appropriate. So it was almost as if, just like with all these other patriarchs in the story, he was like, he's trying to supersede God's plan and doing things that he thinks are doing things the right way according to him. And God's like, well, no, that's not the way that works.
Yeah. I mean, but so the text just says it's a long time, and it also says that his wife died, so he's newly single. You know, he's going to want to get some. Prostitution, I assume, is not against the law. You know, I guess unless you get caught.
Yeah, maybe in wherever that town was.
Yeah,
maybe that's yeah. Well, it was starts with an E. Where she was on the crossroads of the Enaim.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe it's one of those like when in Rome type of things. They're like, oh, they have prostitutes here. Okay.
Yeah. So what was the significance of not sleeping with her again? You know, under their cultural practices, do you think he should have been required to? Like, okay, you've been caught. Now this is your child. You're going to have to take her as a wife as well. I'm
glad you asked that, because I did look into that a little bit.
Oh, cool.
And what they said was that it might have meant that he didn't continue to sleep with her, like be part of like a marital courtship, but he might have still continued to have sexual relations. And it also says that the opposite might have been true, that he might have continued to be like a husband father figure, but he was never intimate with her again. And again, it's just and this was all from one source. This is all from the
speculation.
Yeah. Shabbat.org. Well, I mean, it's funny. You say speculation, and of course I can't disagree from my perspective, but whenever we're trying to interpret passages, and if we want to like seek some outside sources, these are rabbinic, people throughout the ages saying like, well, this is how it works. And then these things get codified into midrash and,
That's
become
true.
the way, well, if you really want to understand what's happening here, read this. And you're like, well, sure, I will, because I want to understand why you believe this. But how in the heck am I supposed to know that? Am I supposed to seek out every source for the last 2,000 years, 4,000 years?
Yeah. And how do you tell once you've done that, which ones have got the correct bits,
You're supposed to just walk around with all this in your head, just bouncing off of each other. Like,
I think you're just supposed to follow the one person, it's how cult of personality kind of gets started. You got to follow this guy because he's got the right interpretation. You don't have to worry about the other stuff. He's investigated it for you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
So not Tara. Is that her name? Tamar. Tamar is given twins by Judah. The first one sticks its hand out, and they're like, "Oh heck yes! Tie a scarlet ribbon or piece of yarn around his wrist." And this is going to be ultimately going to be Zerah,
because that one's supposed to come out first.
That's right.
They don't understand how birth actually works.
So that he punches through. They tie us real quick. It's just his arms just hanging out, and they tie a scarlet thing around his wrist.
So do you think the scarlet thread has anything to do with like Esau being red?
I couldn't see why not. That is perfect. That is
so the way it read to me is it's kind of an allusion to to that story, and the red with the red hair, the red ribbon or whatever. And then also it seemed to me like, I'm the first out, I'm getting this, what's the word I'm looking for, the
birthright.
The birthright. Yeah, I'm getting the birthright as the firstborn. But yeah, I'm actually not, because that's how God likes to do things, Jacob and everything else. That's just the way it kind of read to me a little bit. And that's also reading into it, I'll admit, but that's just the way it's the way I intuited it when I read it.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that. I didn't even see that when I first read it. So anyway, he pulls his hand out. He pulls his hand back in. The other brother comes out. They call him Perez because it says, "This is how you have broken out." I guess that's what Perez means. And then his brother with the scarlet thread came out, and his name was Zerah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end of chapter 38, right?
Yeah, you want to do a little more speculating. It could be backwards. It could be that Perez was the one that was dying to be first and have the birthright, but actually Zerah was the first, and you just tried to take it from him. You know what I mean? Like, again, reading into it, I know I just got onto you, not necessarily onto you, but the idea of reading too much into it, and now I'm doing it. But
well, that's what's so fun about this. This is what's so
exactly.
To me, this is what's interesting. Like,
it's interesting and frustrating.
Yeah. So it says there's a couple of footnotes that say that Perez means breaking out and Zerah means scarlet or bright. So, okay, sure, I like it. All right, chapter 38 is
concluded.
Kaput. Yep. So with chapter 39, so at the end of 37, did you have something to say?
I was just trying to come up with a film term, like it's not a montage, but like we're fast forwarding into a different part of Joseph's life now. Don't know how long he's been in Egypt.
That's a good point. So he's 17 when he's sold into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be 28 when he gives the cupbearer his dream interpretation.
Okay.
And he's ultimately 30 when the famine begins.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure how long he's been in Egypt at this point, at the beginning of 38 either. But let's see. Whoops. What has happened here? So that was in 38. So okay. 39.
Mm-hmm.
Edit. So he sold at the end of 37, he was sold. They mentioned Potiphar by name. It says he's like the leader of the Pharaoh's
captain
guard.
of the guard.
Captain of the guard. That's right. So he sold into Potiphar's house, and Joseph, one thing we didn't mention in 37 is and it doesn't say it in the text, but like he's known for being very beautiful. Like part of what made that robe so interesting and unique is that it was befitting him. It didn't
Hmm.
look, he had like that kind of like just boyish charm, and he
So,
was,
so you could say it was, again, this is wild speculation on my part, but it just seems like what you're saying is like modern celebrities can wear gaudy things that normal people typically can't pull off.
hmm,
It was maybe like that. Maybe it was an ostentatious coat, you know?
yeah, that could be right. He could have been, preparing for the Met Gala or
Mm,
whatever, and the goat blood would have looked just stunning had he not had to relinquish it in order to gain that goat blood.
yeah.
So so he sold into Potiphar's house, and because of how beautiful he is, Potiphar's wife can't keep her constantly whispering in his ear like, "Hey, come here, big boy," things like this. Every time Potiphar's out, she's trying to seduce him, right?
No, but so if him being a beautiful man is, speculation or, extra biblical sources or whatever, uh, that's all well and good, but also couldn't have his success had like it says here that the Lord was with him, so Potiphar, you know, benefited, prospered a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and that could have been attractive to his wife as well.
Oh, good
If
point.
she's the wife of somebody important, an official, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, she might have power and might be able to sleep with whoever she wants.
That's a good point. Yeah, and more extra biblical sources kind of say about her that she was kind of known for her infidelity. She kind of got around, and while
Yeah.
Potiphar didn't necessarily think that was the worst thing, it's not a good image. You can't really have that happen. So like if you have someone that you trust, one like someone, a worker at your house, you know doing these types of things with your wife, regardless of who's responsible for it, you got to do what Potiphar ultimately had to do. So let's
Well,
get to that.
but it could have also been the outcry and not necessarily the act. If he had slept with her, maybe everything would have been just fine. Maybe it
Mm,
was the outcry. He didn't want other people to know, what
yeah.
was going on. I
Wow, that's interesting.
Speculation. I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah, who's to say? But okay, so eventually, through some sort of ruse, Potiphar gets Jacob really close, or gets Joseph really close, grabs him by his house coat, and he runs away. He's like,
Oh
"No, I'm not interested. What's up?"
no, verse 6. Joseph was well built and handsome. It is in the text. I completely glossed over that for some reason.
Hmm.
It says, now
Um,
Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice and said, come to bed with me. I completely missed out on that.
so the reason why I wanted to mention an extra biblical source, and I wasn't quite sure how or even if to put this in, but
Mm-hmm.
something I read said that and I think I got this on Wikipedia because Yosef's story there's a lot of similarities among these different legends, and in most of them, Potiphar, who also appears in these different legends, is attracted to Joseph. And it's almost said that that's part of the reason why he found him, so he wanted to purchase him, is because
Mm-hmm.
he's like, that's a good looking man. That's a ripe young boy there, that 17-year-old Joseph. Strong. Look at his back muscles. Anyway, so yeah. So the wife grabs him by his waistcoat. Joseph's like, no, takes off, and she's quick. She's like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
see. This Hebrew is going to admonish me for my infidelity. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to turn this around. Starts screaming at the top of her lungs, look what this Hebrew did, this Hebrew. And yeah, the townspeople heard her cry, and Potiphar was like, oh geez, look what you made me do. He's got to throw him in the dungeon, right?
Mm-hmm. He throws him in the dungeon, but it says the Lord was with him, so the prison warden put him in charge of everything, and that warden didn't do anything under Joseph's care. Joseph took care of it all. So he went from being in charge of this guy's house to being in charge of the prison and stuff. And like, I know it's a modern way of looking at things, but if the Lord was with him, don't you think he'd keep him out of jail?
Yes.
I think the appropriate way to look at it is that God's got a story that He wants to tell, and this is how He's telling it. But I don't know. Modern eyes, it just seems like an absurd way for God to be behaving.
I would say, like, if we were reading this for the first time, I would say the same thing. But once we get to the part where, so in order for Joseph to be able to reveal his gift to the Pharaoh, he has to be in jail because of who he meets there, right?
I mean, if you're taking this the way I think ancient people would have, if I'm trying to put myself in their mindset, then sure. But again, from a first time, current modern reading, which is kind of the idea behind doing this, you think God could come up with a way to do it that doesn't involve Joseph suffering.
Yeah,
He
definitely.
could have done it. He could have put him in front of Pharaoh somehow. Doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder how integral Joseph's specifically Joseph's suffering is to the story of Joseph.
It also kind of doesn't seem like he suffers much at all, though, because he's in charge of the house. He's now in charge of the prison.
Well, I could be wrong. I want to say you're right. He's in charge of the prison. Let's see, because the Lord was with him. But I mean, still, he's a slave, and now he's in prison. So like he's been granted these some extra dispensation, but it's not freedom, But that said,
yeah, I mean, yes and no. That is the case, but he is in charge. Like the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because Joseph was taking care of it. So, also, if this is supposed to be a prison, a place that's not great, you're not free and all of that, as being in charge of the prison, was Joseph any more or less cruel than the warden beforehand? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
a very good point.
Is he godly and punishing these people less? I don't know.
Yeah,
how that would work.
We don't learn of specific exploits of Joseph's time in charge of the prison. Yeah. So no, that's an excellent point. Yeah, you'd think that, I mean, all we have to go by is what's written here, and we can assume that we can come up with like a way that we'd prefer it to be told, I guess. And that's kind of what we've been doing so far throughout Genesis. But this is kind of in keeping with like, we're left to just be like, all right, if you say so. Like, you're telling me you couldn't have just granted this guy some sort of foreknowledge or a way for him to, like, we can just skip past the thing where he learns his lesson and has to undergo these trials and just like give him the keys. Like, all right, man, here you go. You're next in line. They have to there has to be this sort of circular thing. He wasn't the firstborn. He had to survive potentially being murdered by his brothers, but ultimately being sold into slavery. He had to learn the hard way, like how to gain people's trust and things like that. Every story is like that.
Well, I think that's so. Ancient people are still people. We still, we're essentially the same. If we were alive back then, we would have acted like them. If they were alive now, they would act like us, think like us. We're just people. So we have to assume, these things. He's in jail. Jail sucks. We know that now. It's got to have sucked then. Things would have been different. It may not have sucked in the same ways. It's gonna suck. You're in jail. That's the point.
Yeah.
But we don't have any indication that he actually did learn any lessons, that he had to learn how to deal with people, any of this. All we know is that he was treated badly by his brothers because he was a prick. And then he went and was sold into slavery. He's now in Egypt. He's in charge of everything. Somebody tries to trick him, so he gets sent into prison, and now he's in charge of that. So we don't, there's no indication that he's actually learned anything or demonstrated any kind of wisdom.
There's no arc to his story. Yeah, you're right. That's true. Or there's no arc to his personal journey.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's interesting.
I think that's part of the why, these extra biblical sources, you're talking about the Midrash and everything, they're trying to explain all of this stuff. And you have to invent things to make it work.
Yeah, 100%. You absolutely do. Okay, and so that's how they end 39, by just letting you know that Jacob's in charge of the prison. Or I'm sorry, Joseph is in charge of the prison, and the warden realizes that God is with him, and thus grants him that sort of sovereignty, however limited. Okay, so now we're going to come to the part where Joseph he meets the cupbearer, the former cupbearer and baker to the, help me with what's a king in Egypt called? Pharaoh. Man, these words. Sorry. Okay. He meets the cupbearer and the bread bearer from the Pharaoh.
The baker?
That's the word. And the
bread manufacturing guy.
come to him with their dreams. And
so, but here's one thing I did that stood out before we get there. It talks about these two being put into the prison. It goes from the Pharaoh being angry with them, and so the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph. So
Oh, okay.
is the warden not involved? Like,
Hmm.
I could see the captain of the guard being entrusted with taking these people to the prison or whatever, but don't you think the warden would have been the one to be like, hey, Joseph's in charge, give him to them,
Huh.
or whatever,
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't know,
I
it
didn't
just
catch
stood
that at
out to
all.
me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so they one night they each had a dream. They want to let us know before they come to Joseph. The text wants to let us know before they come to Joseph to tell them that they had dreams, that they had dreams. They wanted to let us know that. So the next morning they get up and they both want to relate their experience, their dreams to Joseph, right?
Oh man.
And they were, so anyway, it says that they were troubled. And he said, all right, well, look, interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. This is literally what the text says.
No,
Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your
I'm sorry, I'm
dreams.
gonna have to jump in,
Okay.
because it's another thing I completely missed until just now. Verse 7 says, so he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house. So
Uh-huh.
is the prison part of the captain of the guard's house, like his, umbrella of influence or whatever? Or is, this like a mistake, an interjection in the story or whatever, where he's not in the prison, but just, still in his master's house and being punished or whatever?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think there's like a dungeon connected to their house to it.
Okay.
Being that he's the captain of the guard, he like I would assume then you would say that he has the chief decision on whether or not to imprison somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and like he probably has like the sharpest weapons. So
Yeah.
you know, anyway, so yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the case. So Joseph comes to them and says, you guys both have these. Why the long face, guys? What's going on?" He said, "Well, we each had troubling dreams. Can you interpret them?" There's no one to interpret them. And he said, "Well, no, of course not. Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." Is there anything to be drawn from that? Do you think Joseph is overstepping his bounds here a little bit by saying,
Yeah, if we had any kind of indication other than his dreams before that he's, because like before he didn't have the interpretation. He just told his family what the dreams were, and they kind of naturally had their own interpretations of what the dreams meant. And
Mhm,
now he's, there's no indication that he's a prophet, that he has, this wisdom from God, or that God is doing this for him. It just says
mhm,
that God's making him prosper or whatever. God's
mhm.
with him. Um, so it does seem to come out of the blue that he's like, oh, I can tell you what that means.
Yeah, yeah. So the cupbearer told Joseph his dreams. Cupbearer, I read supposedly, or the cupbearer is simply the person that presents the Pharaoh with drink. Right, he's the one
Right.
that checks
Refills
to
his
make sure that
cup and
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
make sure that there's nothing that the Pharaoh should dislike. One, I think Rashi said that the reason why those two were in prison was because he saw a fly in his drink and a stone in his bread, so he cast them into prison. So
Yeah, I
anyway,
believe that was chapter 12. No. Yeah.
so anyway, he tells Joseph his dream. His dream is that he saw three vines.
Mm-hmm.
On the vines grew buds and clusters of grapes, and he took the grapes off the vines, squeezed them into the cup, and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And that was the dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph said, "All right, well, the three vines are 3 days." It says branches. I said vines. Within the three branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in your hand, just as you used to do whenever you were his cupbearer.
So, do you think that this interpretation is specific to what the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh, is trying to say by influencing this dream? Or is it, do you think, a kind of standard interpretation style of the area and the time? You know what I mean? Is this like what you could have gone to another sage person in Midian or wherever and gotten a very similar kind of story out of it? Or if this is something that's supposed to be God only. You know what I mean?
It definitely seems divinely inspired only because we know what's happening later.
Well,
right?
and the text wants you to kind of take that position, but it
Uh-huh.
seems to me like if somebody's writing this story and wanting to get the message across, that they would have
Yeah.
used the themes that they're already familiar with.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
I don't know.
No, that's a good point. Is it such an obvious type of thing that it would have spoken this would have rang true to anybody who was to
Well,
hear this type
but
of
it
thing?
also could have been like a standard thing that a twist was put on it, something obvious that they would have caught. Oh, hey, this is
Mhm.
different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
It's something
Well,
to
let's
think
see.
about.
Yeah, let's apply that to the next dream. The baker came to Joseph with his. Oh, first Joseph implores the cupbearer to not forget him whenever he is
Right.
restored to his position, and the cupbearer says, "No problem, Joe. I got you, dog." And the baker,
I've been putting Joe in my notes just because I think it's funny, but I'm trying to avoid saying it because I don't want
yeah.
to be
Well,
disrespectful or
he and the
anything.
cupbearer have known each other for a while. They're friends. They're on
Yeah.
friendly terms.
Yeah.
So the baker was like, "Oh, that's a pretty good interpretation. I want an
Hmm.
interpretation like that." And he said, "Hey, Joseph, what do you think of my dream?" He's like, "Well, tell me your dream." He's like, "Okay, well, I had 3 baskets on my head, and inside those baskets were all the delicious goodies that I make for the Pharaoh. And but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. I couldn't shoo the birds away." And Joseph was like, "Well, 3 baskets for 3 days, but within 3 days, the Pharaoh will lift off your head, impale your body on a pole, and birds will eat away your flesh."
I see. Maybe
And
that's the twist.
mm-hmm,
You know, I mean, because the one for the cupbearer seems specific. You know, the
mm-hmm,
3 branches of 3 days. They're gonna, you know, do whatever they do, and then in this one, it's even more specific, and it's completely the opposite of the direction. You know, the dreams are relatively similar to very different things. So maybe that's the twist. Maybe nobody was expecting, you know, you to be impaled and birds to eat the flesh. I don't know.
I wonder if there's something there. So the is the disconnect for you that bread symbolizes flesh because there is the Eucharist.
No, I the twist to me, and again, this is completely speculation. I'm just
It's okay. That's what we're here
but
for.
yeah, the idea that they're both relatively similar. Doesn't the vineyard want to have the branches withering? No, it doesn't. Um, anyway, it just seems like uh, even though you've got the birds eating the bread, that kind of hints towards a negative. It just seems so drastically different that I'm wondering if that's the twist. Like they were
Mm,
expecting maybe something bad, but nothing that bad. You know what I mean? And so that catches
interesting.
their attention. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's almost as if so they each have very similar dreams. One of which means you're going to get your job back. Everything will be the way it was, and the other
Hmm.
one is they're going to decapitate you and let your rotting body get pecked apart by birds. It's like, whoa, like that went to 11. Like, what in the heck? Like, what did I do?
Yeah,
So, yeah, that very well could be. Okay. So 3 days later is the Pharaoh's birthday. And he, sure enough, he gave
that makes it seem like it's less God and more.
the
Oh,
Pharaoh.
I know what's coming. 3 days from now is
Oh,
the Pharaoh's birthday.
exactly. That's so interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. So he gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and chief baker. So, okay. So in the verse before that, the Pharaoh is going to lift off his head. And in this case, he lifts up their heads. Okay. So he brings them back into his presence, restores the chief cupbearer to his position, and who fulfills Joseph's interpretation, puts the cup into Pharaoh's hand, and then just as Joseph had said, he impales the baker and does those terrible things,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, and then the cupbearer was so happy to have his position restored that he totally forgot who Joseph was.
That doesn't seem like this dude says exactly what's going to happen. It happens. Yeah, I'm happy, but I'm not going to forget that guy. But
Especially once you see the baker like on a pole, you're like, okay, you
yeah,
think like there was someone who foresaw this.
yeah. One thing I missed when you were talking about it earlier, though, verse 15 says, "I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews." He
Mm,
says that as if they would know what that's supposed to mean. As far as we know at this point, the Hebrews as just this one family unit. Maybe Judah was off on its own, being
Mm-hmm.
exiled temporarily or permanently, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
But sure, God had promised them this land, but I don't think anybody but them would have known that, and nobody would have called it the land of the Hebrews unless
Hmm.
this was already a thing, and this is a later story. You know what I mean?
Well, I recall earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that Hebrew has an earlier etymology meaning wanderer. I wonder if that's all he's meaning by that. If I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews in a way that
Possibly,
the Egyptians would know what he's talking about.
possibly.
They might not know about the covenantal promise that God made them, but
Hmm.
they would at least know what he means when he says, "I'm a foreigner." When
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Potiphar's wife is like, "This Hebrew did this. This Hebrew did this." Like she to me, she's essentially saying this outsider, this foreigner. He doesn't even speak the same language, which
Yeah,
we
and
did
it
mention.
could be a translation problem too.
Yeah, we learn later that he doesn't. So Joseph is recognized as if not a Hebrew, capital H,
Hmm.
at least as a foreigner, insofar as they don't allow him to eat with them. He needs a translator. All of these things. So
Does he need a translator?
yeah, we'll learn later that whenever his brothers are there, begging for grain, or at least trying to negotiate transaction, he doesn't. They don't realize that he speaks their language because there's a translator there.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he needs a translator. You know what I
Ah,
mean?
okay. Yes.
That could have just been part of the ruse. You know what I
Gotcha.
mean?
Yes. 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 Okay. Very good.
Yeah. And anytime there's a translation, there's commentary added into it.
Uh-huh.
Even if it's subliminal, not intentional. Um, that could easily explain where the Hebrew came from, the land of the Hebrews. It could have
Mm-hmm.
been, you know, foreigner, something like that, and then
Mm-hmm.
people just adding their own into it when they try to determine what the proper translation is.
Let me go back to 40. You said 15.
Hmm.
I was forcibly carried. This is NIV. I was
Hmm.
forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve to be put in a dungeon. And I also have open the Old Testament, the Bereshit. I have the Jewish Bible open. It says
Yeah, I need to do that.
15. For I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and hereto I have done nothing wrong, for which they have put me into the dungeon.
Yeah,
And so,
ESV has that stolen wordage as
uh-huh,
well, and the
uh-huh,
Catholic Bible says unjustly carried away. So
interesting. Yeah, and so, but I'm assuming then that the Catholic version says the land of the Hebrews as well.
yes, they all say the land of the Hebrews.
Oh yeah, there it is. That's very interesting. Um, okay, so once again, the cupbearer forgot him, and
Hmm.
so alas, Joseph is meant to continue to wither, or at least have to put up with some more dungeon shenanigans. Okay, all right, so we're on to 41.
Hmm.
Um, the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh is now having troubling dreams. He is out by the Nile, and out of the river walk 7 beautiful cows. I mean, we are talking heavenly heifers. And
Attractive and plump.
that's right, robust flesh.
Yeah.
And they stood beside the Nile on the riverbank, and then gaunt and ugly cows came out of the Nile and ate them up, according to the NIV, devoured according to the Hebrew Bible. Basically, to me, meaning there was nothing left of the beautiful cows, right?
Hmm.
And all that remained were these gaunt and ugly cows, and there was no semblance of the original cows, such that to the extent that the gaunt and ugly ones were still gaunt and ugly after feasting on them.
Mm.
Okay, so
Well, they may not have been gaunt, but they certainly would not have been healthy.
yeah, yeah, precisely, yeah. So he, so the Pharaoh woke up and then he fell asleep. I'm not being sagacious there. Like those two lines are smashed up
Yeah.
against each
Well,
other.
I mean, I could easily see him startling himself awake and then be like, "Oh, it was
Oh
just a
yeah,
dream. Go back to sleep."
yeah. Well, he's gonna wish he hadn't, because then
Oh
7
yeah.
heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk, and after them 7 other heads of grain sprouted lower on the stalk. I'm assuming, thin and scorched by the east wind.
I think that's got to be important. The east wind has got to signify, like maybe every time there is a famine in the area, there's an east wind that blows, kind of an El Nino effect or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yeah, I would assume also that east wind, judging by like where they are on the globe, is probably a more like a desert wind. It's probably carrying.
Well, it's gonna come west to east, so it would be coming in that area across the Sahara.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, and then to the east, where at a westerly wind, it would be the land. It would be like the fertile land, the land of the Mesopotamia, and the land of the river, the
Red Sea, and all of that.
Yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned that. That's great. So anyway, the thin, ugly seeds or sprouts ate up the healthy sprouts above them, the full heads of grain. And then the Pharaoh woke up, and he was troubled. So he sent for in this NIV it says the magicians and wise men. Mm-hmm. And in Bereshit it says he sent for the necromancers and the sages. So I think that's pretty fun. I didn't know that that necromancers and magicians were considered sort of.
Let me double check here, because I think the King James says something similar. What chapter are we on?
We're on 41.
41. No, it's magicians and wise men. I've seen. I swear I've seen the sages used before.
Okay. Well, it's mostly the necromancers that I think are cool.
Yeah, I mean, but what does that word mean in the ancient, like not necessarily what does that word mean in the ancient tongue, but like, what was the concept?
So Rashi has that necromancers are those who would arouse themselves with the bones of the dead so that they would be able to inquire of the bones. So
blood magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. Magicians, blood. So he gathered all the blood magicians and tried to get them to interpret his dreams. But the cupbearer was like, oh, you know what? I met a dude in prison who knows how to do that. And he's like, I told him. And then the cupbearer tells him exactly what happened. The story that we've already gone over. And Joseph's like, or the Pharaoh was like, yeah, bring him. Joseph comes. And,
but they repeat it again. So you're talking about the chiasm and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily see it here. Mm-hmm. I haven't looked super hard, but it does seem odd that he's like repeating it again to the Pharaoh. Obviously, the Pharaoh doesn't know this; he needs to be told. But why does it have to be in the story if it's not for a purpose?
Because we've actually discussed this before. I remember whenever I was editing. Whenever there are these word for word almost reiterations, it's to let you know that these are the divinations of God. It's to let you know that these are divinely inspired things that are happening. And that's not to say that God's interactions with them are limited to the times when these things are reiterated, but it's to remind you this happened specifically like this. That's how you know that God was involved. So like even when it comes to Eliezer finding a bride and like explaining to Laban what he had going on, things like that, or whoever was in charge, I forget. To this story here, whenever there's a specific order of events and they're reiterated, God.
So I understand that, but coming up here in the 32nd verse of this chapter, it's going to say that explicitly. The reason Pharaoh was given the dream in two forms is to let you know that God's serious. This is going to happen. But again, I don't know, like, because it's not exact. It's not the same. It's
right.
It's just a summarization of what happened. But again, why do we need to know it? Like, I understand where you're coming from. I think you're probably right, but it seems odd to me still.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm not. This isn't even my theory. This is just something I've read because I've been curious about it too. And I'll also say that whenever the cupbearer is telling Pharaoh about Joseph, he's doing it in like a demeaning, derogatory way. He's using, again, this isn't. Let's see, what does it say here? A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. Look, this is two words that Rashi goes really in depth on. But young Hebrew, he goes into that like we're referring back to the Jewish Bible. He's referred to as a Hebrew lad, a slave, and he's reminding the Pharaoh that this isn't one of our people. This is things like that. And he calls him a lad, meaning he's not wise, he hasn't grown, he's just a kid, and so on and so forth. And he's basically saying, like, take from that what you will. I'm not saying he's a genius by any means, but he interpreted my dream and it came true. And the
Mm-hmm.
dude that you killed on your birthday, remember that? That was so much fun. He said that was going to happen too. So, and again, this is Rashi. That's all Rashi.
Right.
And that guy's name, Rashi's name is Shlomo. And there's something about the name Shlomo that makes me want to believe what they say.
It kind of does make me wonder where that comes from. You know, what's the meaning of calling him Shlomo? But you know, I'm not trying to make fun of it or anything. I'm curious.
I don't know. Maybe that's just his name.
Yeah.
Okay. So Pharaoh's like, sounds great. Get him up here. Joseph, he tells Joseph his dreams. And again, he tells it specifically again. He tells us again. So the cupbearer told Pharaoh his specific dream. And now the Pharaoh is repeating the dream to Joseph that we've already read. We already know all this stuff. And it says that basically he said that even after the ugly cows ate the clean cows, you couldn't tell if they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before, like you said. Then he tells him about the grain dream. And he said he told this to the magicians, but no one could explain it to him. And Joseph said, the dreams are one and the same. Just like he said to the cupbearer and the baker. He's like, y'all's dreams are very similar. The three vines were 3 days, and the 3 baskets were 3 days. In this case, both of your dreams are the same. He's saying we're gonna have 7 years of unbelievable harvests and 7 years of just utter devastating famine. He gives some examples here, which I personally think are awesome. I love the way they put this. It says the abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. Mm-hmm. It's like, man, that's such a trite and succinct way of putting that.
Oh yeah,
no notes. Good job. You know, the reason. Oh yeah, you're right. 32. The reason this dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms, that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. That's great. That
and
almost
now it's been given
confirms.
to us 4 times.
It's like, all right, how many gods? But yeah,
God's
so
really, 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 really serious about it now.
Yeah. Okay, it says, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man to put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Collect all this food, store it under the authority of Pharaoh in like local granaries and stuff. And that food should be held in reserve for when the famine comes, because believe me, it's going to be wild. And the Pharaoh looked to his people and was like, who knows anyone, someone who's in the spirit of God, someone who's handsome and maybe used to wear a robe.
Yeah. I was about to mention that, but I did want to go back to the thing, like you said, how succinct that was and perfect to say that, you know, nobody's going to remember the surplus because the famine's going to be so bad. I just want to do a little bit of math on this.
Okay. I love this, and I think I know where you're going at, so please do.
20%. Years that are good are so good that you can put 20 away. And that 20% is going to be enough to sustain everybody for a year after, because, you know, 7 and 7, 20% will sustain everybody, but it's going to be really bad. So, like, you know, they just trying to juxtapose this so good that only 20 will sustain everybody eventually, but they're going to be sustained, but it's still going to be so bad. You know what I mean? It just, that just seems wild.
Yeah, that's the way I see it too. So anyone who's planned for retirement would know that you have to live on 50% of your income in order to have that same 50% in a year that you're not working.
Exactly.
So you'd think that if you wanted to put away some grain, you'd put away 50% for every year that you needed that much grain later. But the abundance is so great that 1/5 will sustain us. But still, the famine, I wonder if he means the famine specifically or the results of the famine will be so bad that we won't remember the abundance. We're going to save 20%, but
I think that has to be that bad. Because the reason I brought that up was because I was going to mention in the future when the famine actually happens, it says that Egypt had enough for the whole world to come and participate. So exactly. 20 was enough to sustain the whole world for 7 years. And it's still bad, you know, like it's not like, oh, we're good. But 20 is enough to sustain the whole world, at least what they knew of as the world.
It's enough to sustain the whole world. There's still pestilence. Some of their grain goes to pot. It's ruined. People come in buying more than what they need. And the government has such a stranglehold on this grain that they reduce. We'll get to it, but this is what makes me so incredulous about this whole thing. They reduce their population to slavery, to poverty. They're like, yeah,
Yeah.
we have the grain. We plan for you guys to have plenty, but it's
We
not going to be
planned for
free.
you guys to buy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You worked for it. You stored it. You're the ones that had to do without for a time. But
Hmm.
you don't have any more goats. What else you got? Like, yeah. So anyway, we'll get to that because
Yeah.
I was reading that and just I was infuriated by it.
Yeah.
Okay. So before the years of famine came, okay, sorry, I don't want to skip too far ahead. The Pharaoh basically puts Joseph in charge of Egypt. He skips all that crap where he's like, who do we know that fits this
Yeah.
bill? He's like, you know what, Joseph, you're the guy for the job. You ran the prison so well. You were smart about these dreams. It's time for you to run
Well,
Egypt.
didn't Joseph say you need to find somebody wise? I
Yeah,
wonder who that could be.
a man of God.
Yeah.
Do we know anyone like that who has two
So,
thumbs?
so what? Another thing that makes me curious about this, and just the differences between then and now, it had to have been common enough for something like this to actually happen that people would think that it's actually going on, or else it would, what was the phrase that Hillary Clinton used? Suspension of disbelief. I think that was the first time I heard it used. It would take them out of the story if this was so absurd, So this kind of thing, someone going from the lowest of slaves to being in charge of Egypt, had to have been at least possible for this to, skate by. And it just makes me wonder about the differences between our time and then, how crazy that would be. Because like today, we like to think that anybody could be president here in the United States, but for the most part, no, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be rich. You've got to be in politics for the most part. It's just so different.
It's true. Well, but okay, so let's say let's grant that that's the case, that this could be possible. It doesn't. If this could be possible, if this is at least not outside the standard of belief that we might set for ourselves in our culture, then its story isn't that inspired, right? It's like, oh well, that's pretty amazing, but I mean, sure, I believe it. But let's consider the opposite, where it's only through this insane series of divinely inspired things that this kid, I'm not gonna say came from nothing. He had everything taken away from him, and then was granted everything. And the key every step of the way to gaining more and more power, influence, ability, whatever, was these things that God gave him. Literally, it was all given to him by God. The ability to interpret these dreams, the fact that all these people recognized in him that he had God with him, wouldn't have happened had it not been for God, right? And so,
I mean, yeah, but like nobody's running around with fictional stories, even ones that are like, as majestic, and thinking that, this could actually have actually happened. It's real in some way.
mhm,
Um, even the like films that say based on a true story, everybody knows that this is a highly exaggerated thing,
yeah, liberties
um,
taken.
exactly. So like, it's what I'm trying to get at the very least, that couldn't have been invented out of whole cloth.
Hmm.
Like, oh snap, the slaves now in charge. Whoa, what?
Yeah,
It had to have been at least conceptually possible,
yeah.
for
No,
if
so yeah.
not to go that high in the ranks, but to maybe become captain of the guard or something.
Mhm.
It had to have been possible.
Would you say that? Would you be willing to grant that, insofar as it's possible and believable, that this is an outcome that could happen, it couldn't happen without God?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I can say, or I could see that that could be a justification for it, easily accepted even today. If something like that were to happen, and it be demonstrable, President Trump becomes president. Nobody at first thought
Oh, what?
nobody at first thought that was possible, except for a small group of people or whatever. And then he gained steam, and he eventually got it. Uh, and somebody could come back and say that's all because of God, and it could be believable. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's a similar thing here. I'm just saying, like, it couldn't have been outside the realm of possibility, and people being like, "Oh yeah, God could do that." You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. Because then what's the limit? Like, what,
Exactly.
where could we stop? Like, he
Yeah.
went to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, like, yeah. So where have we? I like that. You're right. That could very well be. Um, so he grants Joseph all this power, and not just power to. He says he's in charge. Let's take a look at the scope of what the Pharaoh has granted him, just because. And this stuff hasn't even come true yet. Basically, what Joseph said, he's like, look, the reason why this happened, you got two of the same dream, is because God's ready to start acting on this. And so using only what the stories that he's gotten third hand from other people, the Pharaoh's like, all right, look, you're the second in command. He's like, the only reason why I'm higher than you is because of my title. He's like, here's my signet ring. You have a blank check. That's what that is. Here's fine linen. Here's my second chariot. He gets Air Force Two. He's like, look, I get the nice chariot, but you get the one I keep in the garage. Like there's my other chariot. And basically becomes the Pharaoh by proxy. And it says that Joseph at this point is 30 years old whenever he enters his service. I'll kind of skip ahead, and I did some figuring, and Jacob is 91. His father, Joseph's father, Jacob, is 91 years older than he is. So at this point, Jacob is 121 years old. And neither here nor there, but we'll figure that out. We'll come back.
I think I actually did that math coming up later.
Oh, did you? Good.
I think so. I could be wrong. I know I did some math based on ages, but
so they have the 7 years of abundance, just like Jacob said, or just like, gosh darn it, just like Joseph said. They collected all the food and stored it in the cities, and they had so much grain they couldn't measure it anymore. Like there was no number that they could use, right?
Except that it was 20%. They talked about that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. If you can't count how much you have, how do you know what 20%?
Well, the 20% was, from where does it? No, it's got to be later on that it says 20%. We haven't gone over that yet, have we?
Have we not? I thought
it wasn't. It wasn't part of. Well, I mentioned it, but was it part of the dream?
Yeah, I think he's like, look, we gotta.
Oh no, it does say take a fifth. So they know they're taking a fifth, but
a fifth of what? A fifth of two. A fifth of a whole that you can't count. How much is it? I mean, like 20% of infinity is still infinity.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
So, all right. And then...
It's also 20% of infinity, though.
That's true. It's not quite infinity. That's, wasn't Hubert's Hotel, that famous... Yeah. So anyway, before the famine came, and this is very important, before the famine, the Pharaoh gave Joseph a wife.
That's daughter of Potiphar.
Okay. Priest of On. That's right. So they give Potiphar the title of priest of On. Potiphar was also, according to some research I did, was a governor. So priest, governor, I'm not sure if those are the same thing, probably two different titles, and that person's in charge of a lot of different things.
I think similar to like the Aztecs and the Mesoamerican kind of stuff, I think the Pharaoh was not just the king, not just like God incarnate, he was the head of the religious order. Anything religious, all period. The Pharaoh's got it. So I can easily see his governors also being priests and things like that.
Fair. Do you have any qualms, or do you have any questions about about this person's name being Potiphar and Potiphar being Joseph's first charge, or his first?
I mean, at first glance, it does seem a little bit weird, but it could be that it's just a relatively common name or title, or it could be that the captain of the guard was promoted, to the governorship and took this extra letter on his name or extra vowel at the end of the name, to signify that. I have no qualms with it.
So did we get born to Joseph by Asenath? Okay, so Asenath is his wife's name. They get Manasseh because God has made me forget all of my trouble in my father's house and all of my father's household. He has Manasseh, he has this wife, and he gives that child the name that basically says that I don't even think about my family anymore. Like I have all this other stuff going on.
Well, he's as in essence the Pharaoh of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's pretty good motivation to not think about
the people that try
your
to kill
family and stuff.
And
Sorry, the room tilted a minute.
Oh, the second son he named Ephraim and said, because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. I suppose you could say that he suffered in Egypt. There's no problem with there. But he is the Pharaoh. Like, this has been so troublesome.
The suffering's got to be, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, like I think I mentioned it before in a previous podcast, but even the super rich and wealthy today, they have problems. They're people just like we are. There
Mm-hmm.
are problems with them having so much money, but they have their own issues. So he could have suffered, and I broke a nail. Damn, he could have suffered. I'm not going to deny that.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem like it, but who am I to judge?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. One thing I read was that the reason, like, it's kind of deemed untoward or against the Lord nowadays, or after this, hitherto,
Mm-hmm.
to have a child during a famine, having a child during like periods of less like fewer provisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of why, that's what they at least draw from this, that he has his children before the famine begins.
Okay.
He knew it was coming, and so he made these plans to do this before the famine began. Just reading into it. And
well, I mean,
so,
he can't have spilt his seed on the ground, obviously. So he had to have, just not.
Yeah, no, that's some good seed. TikTok. Anyway, so there's famine everywhere, and when all of Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to the Pharaoh for food. The Pharaoh told the Egyptians, go do what Joseph tells you to do. Now, this is important because the Pharaoh has essentially washed his hands of this whole project. He's like, look,
Mm-hmm.
he's in charge. Okay, because there are some decisions that Joseph makes later where I'm like,
Yeah.
I thought we were trying to learn that you're a good dude.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Godly person. Yeah.
Yeah. When the famine spread over the entire country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. Again, let me just to reiterate, the product of their work, the product of their land, he sold it to them. And all of the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess God's going to make him prosperous in everything he does, including the swindling of people, I mean, I guess you could take it to say that all of the grain belonged to Pharaoh in the first place, but it also, it does imply later that the prices were inflated.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Okay, so I think that about wraps up what we're going to discuss on this episode, the end of Genesis 41 here. We'll pick back up in 42 on the next episode when Joseph's brothers come calling, because it's the famine.
Famine is worldwide.
It's widespread. I wanted to thank you for joining us for this discussion. Feel free to let us know your thoughts. We're at Eating the Apple on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
And please correct us for sure.
Yeah, like we said in previous episodes, don't be a jerk. Like we're doing our best. We're not trying to crap on anything. We're reading it the way.
I mean, there's humor that we're finding in here, and it's just in our natures. We can't help but joke whenever we have the opportunity. But we are taking this seriously. And we're not joking to offend.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. All right, until next time, I am Jeff.
I've been Chris.
And this has been Eating the Apple.